I, of course, want to start with acknowledging, celebrating and paying respects to the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people of the Canberra region, where I'm coming to you from, and of course paying respects to all First Nations peoples on the lands that we're all meeting on across the country and the world. And yes, of course, paying respects to elders past and present and to any of our Indigenous colleagues joining us online. So I'm Sharon Friel. Welcome to our Saving the World webinar series. No small task for each of our speakers, just we're going to save the world. And it's something that we, of course, run through the Planetary Health Equity Hothouse, where we're really concerned about what we call this consumptogenic system, this system of actors, of institutions, of policies, commercial activities, norms that really are causing environmental and human harm and very unequally distributed. And what we're doing this year is really featuring the Hothouse scholars, the research fellows, the PhD students, the Planetary Health Equity fellows that joined us through the Future Leaders programs over the past few years. And every month we will be doing this, hearing different aspects to address that consumptogenic system. And so today I'm so excited. We're going to hear from Roxana Tompea, I got it wrong, Hafner. Roxana is one of the laureate PhD students and doing this incredible work that you'll hear about. She has a background in international relations and worked for a number of years with the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. And there she was looking at circular economy principles in industry and small, medium enterprises. So a really excellent background to be able to, and experience to bring to bear these questions of food systems, industry, planetary health equity, and as you'll hear, this incredibly exciting and important attention to greenwashing. So we'll hear from Roxana now for about 30 minutes or so. We'll have plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. So Roxana, no further ado, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you for the lovely, lovely introduction. I'll just share my screen now, and while making sure that technology is doing its job.
Perfect.
Yes, lovely. So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning for some special guests, and also good evening for some special guests who are tuning in from far away. Thank you so much for deciding this is how you want to spend an hour of your time. Learning and speaking about deceit, disclosure, and the regulation in ultra-processed foods. I'd also like to take a moment and acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of Canberra as the traditional custodians on the land upon which ANU is based, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, as well as any Indigenous colleagues who are online with us today. Now, some of you might have seen this image circulating on the Hothouse LinkedIn profile. This is a rather known chocolate wrapper that is produced by a large international corporation owned by an even larger transnational corporation. In 2024, it was sold across 90 different countries, 90 that is. And on the wall right here next to me, I have that board capturing 32 examples of packaging, 32 countries that is, where this wrapper is being sold. Now, the brand slogan is "Have a break," except we can really, because the break this bar is selling us is built on something that is breaking the planet. Now, I know this might seem a bit inflated thing to say about a chocolate bar, but do bear with me till the end. As part of my PhD, I'm using analogies like this chocolate wrapper as a window into the wider political economy of food systems and some of their most harmful effects. On the surface, it's all about the product, what is written on the label, be it about nutrition or environment. And from here on, we're going to see that everything related to the environment is green claim. And this is followed by the second layer. Once we go deeper, we have the process. This is what makes the product possible. It's about labor conditions, sourcing practices, and packaging. Green claims here take the form of certifications that are mobilized as proxies to signal responsibility. Go deeper still, and we reach the producer level or the corporation level. This is where the marketing apparatus sits, as well as the relationship with regulation. At this point, green claims are not just about advertising anymore. They're a power practice. Now, these three levels are where my research sits, and also the layers through which I'm exploring what regulatory reforms are needed to challenge harmful environmental claims and reimagine food systems in ways that prioritize planetary health equity over private profit. And the confectionery sector is a brilliant case study to investigate. Confectionery products in general, and chocolate in particular, have significant environmental impact, from the intensely farmed ingredients all the way to land deforestation, water use, as well as waste and packaging. Yet, their producing brands increasingly invest in sustainability and green claims, making sure their statements about the environmental properties are well known. Most of the green claims turn out to be unsubstantiated, misleading, or false, a phenomenon called greenwashing. When a green claim becomes greenwashed, it does more than just rob consumers of the truth. It robs society of genuine climate action and of a sustainable future. Now, this matters today more than ever, because when we're looking at the global risks that are ranked by severity, we see that second, right after geo-economical confrontation, comes mis and disinformation, and extreme weather events come strong on the fourth side. And this is all short term, that is happening in the next 2 years. Long term, in the next 10 years, we see that everything is about climate change, extreme weather conditions, loss of biodiversity, and then mis and disinformation still sits strong second after climate change. So it comes as no surprise when we see interlinked crises that are compounding or one over another. And our core research here at the PhD Institute is to look at the interconnection between crises, specifically between health, environment, and equity. Human health is deteriorating. It is doing so as a consequence of social and commercial determinants of health, mostly through non-communicable diseases. Our environment is breaking down faster than our governance systems can respond to, and there's structural inequity deepening both within and between countries. The root cause of this all is what Sharon also mentioned at the beginning of the talk, the consumptogenic system, the nexus of commercial actors, practices, and norms that perpetuate this unfeathered economic growth and wealth concentration, despite the direct consequences on human health and the health of the planet. Food systems sit at the very center of this polycrisis, and there's a specific category of food that is the most pernicious of them all: ultra-processed foods. Now, using the NOVA classification system that looks at the extent and purpose of food processing, so not the nutrient profile, we understand that ultra-processed foods are the most industrially engineered food category. They're often wrapped in plastic. They contain a myriad of ingredients, such as emulsifiers, preservatives, artificial flavors, that all are designed to drive overconsumption and maximize profit rather than provide nutrition. This category is widely used to highlight and explain this displacement of traditional diets, as well as the role of industrial food systems in driving the obesity pandemic. Ultra-processed foods are not just captured and controlled, they're dominating the sphere, and they're produced by transnational food corporations. And in this visual here, you see at a global level who are the largest players, and I'm sure you will recognize many of the names. Now, in this context, I was curious to understand what is the category of ultra-processed foods that dominates them all? What is the most profitable but also dominant? from across the spectrum. So here we're thinking of sweet and savory snacks, ready-to-eat meals, sauces and dips, soft drinks. And unsurprisingly, confectionery is the category that dominates the UPF space. Confectionery is mainly produced by these 5 players. So these are the largest corporations that dominate the confectionery market and is represented by sugar-based candy, gum, and chocolate products. Now, confectionery is par excellence discretionary. There's no dietary necessity for a chocolate bar. And yet, it's among the most profitable and heavy marketed product categories within the whole food system. It is also governed by an unusual complex matrix of chemical and physical phenomena. And here we're thinking about flavor, consistency, fat behavior, moisture control, and crystallization. It requires simultaneous mastery of industrial chemistry, material science, and an aesthetic judgment. Making candy is truly like making art. Yet this art comes with a price too high to overlook. And the price can be separated into 2 halves. One is the health impact of confectionery, which is deeply captured in the studies and work of many great scholars. The second half is the environmental cost, which is also the topic of my presentation today. So going back to the core of the research that I'd like to share with you now, and what the focus is all about in terms of confectionery, greenwashing, and regulation, I wanted to pick a case study that could be emblematic or representative of the wider questions that I'm about to ask. And the European Union made sense because of both position as well as sophistication when it comes to regulation and embracement of sustainability. The European Union is a leader when it comes to sustainability regulation. It's one of the world's largest markets that really has the power to shape progress towards genuine sustainability. It has a wide engagement with green claims. It also acknowledges that greenwashing is pernicious across all sectors, and it's also highly concerned with nutrition, acknowledging that ultra-processed foods represent around half of the total dietary energy needs of Europeans. So in this context, in the European Union region, I was curious to know what transnational food corporations are doing when it comes to the environment. Specifically, what do confectionery producers say? What are the green claims and are they substantiated or not? And to analyze that, I developed a greenwashing typology that very much describes the reports the companies are bringing forward when they're making environmental claims. These reports range from financial reports to sustainability, annual reports, and so forth. And it was important to know not just what the companies communicate when it comes to green claims, but also what is the regulation in place telling us about the quality of these claims. So in terms of regulation, I wanted to see if there are opportunities to address greenwashing as a problem and if green claims are properly assessed or not. So overall, what this all research is about is the analysis of the 5 global confectionery producers worldwide against the existing legislation and regulation around greenwashing. In terms of regulation, there are a lot of pieces happening. I'll speak about them in a few minutes. But what I wanted to share at this point in time is that it's not just about what is concrete and public that is relevant for the context of this work. It's also what the experts are experiencing in different fields. So I wanted to speak with different experts, that is epistemic communities that range from regulatory to industry to civil society, academics, and public health domains to really understand how they see greenwashing as a problem and what would they account as a good green claim. So I talked a lot about greenwashing, but I haven't defined the concept yet. And for those who wonder what is the standalone definition, unfortunately, there is no one-size-fits-all exhaustive way to conceptualize the term. A robust definition, however, and a pretty pertinent one, would describe the concept as a deceptive form of communication of environmental properties that portray products, services, processes, and businesses as being environmentally preferable or friendly, when in reality they're not. When green claims are unsubstantiated, vague, misleading, inaccurate, or false, this is a case of greenwashing. In Australia, we have two major regulatory agencies that deal with greenwashing and even define it as a concept. One of them is the ACCC that describes it as false or misleading environmental claim. It happens when a business appears more environmentally beneficial than it is. And it also stipulates issues like omission and deceptive conduct, while acknowledging that greenwashing can also happen inadvertently. That is, businesses might be committed to sustainability, but accidentally commit to greenwash. And this is very important when we're speaking about regulation later on, because it provides an avenue for potential remedies. Another regulatory agency, ASIC, is telling us that greenwashing represents the distortion of relevant information that a current or prospective investor might require to make an informed decision. The definition here is important because it has a focus on both intent as well as the harm caused by the fact that that decision was altered. Now, beyond food and finance, greenwashing matters in day-to-day life as well, because false and superficial green solutions delay, distract, and discredit real climate action. And they increase the environmental burden on those already most affected, while protecting business as usual practices constructed under this apparent veil of greenness. And thinking about the veil of greenness, I was interested to see what the corporations at hand communicate. How thin or how thick is their veil? Unsurprisingly, when it's about green claims and sustainability, the UPF sector dominates the discourse. The sustainable food sector is a prolific one. It's valued at over 100 billion US dollars, and it has a compound annual growth rate of over 7%. Similar to that is the sustainable packaging market with a similar growth. And remember, packaging is deeply, deeply tied, especially plastic packaging, to the confectionery sector. On its own, confectionery is valued at over 600 billion US dollars and has a strong compound annual growth rate. So it comes as no surprise then why almost 100% of all retailers list sustainability as key to their sourcing and to their growth. And this is also why we see that these players are not engaged in just telling us how they care for people and the planet, how snacking is made right, or indulgence is made responsible, but also in general, what a sustainable generation looks like, and even more abstract, what a sustainable future should look like according to their own views. Now, there is no ambiguity with regards to the purpose of all of this. The purpose is to generate profit. And having a magnifying glass, hypothetically as well as physically, and delving a bit deeper into some of these reports, I was quite fascinated to see recurring themes or sectors that are equally important regardless of the nature of the business. So all of the 5 confectionery producers that are producing the chocolates we see on the shelves in the supermarkets, they all focus on these core themes. It's either about sustainability in their supply chains, about reduction of emissions, agriculture and environmental practices, or very tailored to the individual needs. It's about responsible consumption, packaging, rights, and labor. Now, curiously enough, these areas are some of the most complex to measure, assess, report, confirm, and communicate when it comes to green claims. This is where most of the greenwashing is happening. Equally interesting, these areas marked in red is where regulation is lagging behind. Now, I'd like to take a moment here and focus on a dichotomy that is quite interesting. So we have cocoa as a core commodity for all confectionery producers. Cocoa is a cash crop for over 5 million farmers. 90% it's produced on areas as small as 2 to 5 hectares. And around 70% of all of our cocoa comes from West Africa, namely Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And this is where we see this price value inversion. So we talked a bit earlier that confectionery is valued high, over 600 billion US dollars. Yet the farmers, the 5 million farmers engaged in producing this most iconic ingredient, the cacao, they earn 1.2 US dollars a day. That's well below the extreme poverty line. And because of that, they also have to engage other family members in harvesting cocoa. That includes also child labor. Currently, almost 2 million children are working on cocoa farms. The premium consumers see this and pay for sustainability in their chocolates. However, the sustainability does not travel down the supply chain. Cocoa production is extremely laborious but not lucrative as a business for farmers. Equally important is the relationship cocoa has with the environment. It has a high environmental impact when it comes to upstream processes. We're thinking here about pesticides, fertilizers, the use and degradation of the soil, the burning of stubble, and so forth. So it's highly damaging for the environment when it's grown. Equally important is that cocoa requires very specific climate conditions because it's susceptible to weather changes like strong rain or heat and viruses, because most of the trees the farmers work with are old trees that have a lower yield and they're quite vulnerable. And this is exactly what happened at the end of 2024 when cocoa prices experienced an unprecedented surge. They peaked from $3,000 per ton up to 12,000. So 4 times the price. And that was because of a heavy rain season that led to viruses, pod viruses, as well as mold. So it was a smaller yield and a higher price for cacao. Don't get me wrong, the consumers felt that price and paid the premium, and the corporations cashed the profit. So in this whole context and seeing the dynamics of crisis happening all around, I was interested to understand how corporations really understood their environmental impact. Specifically, can they have the cake and eat it too? That is, can they accept responsibility for their environmental impact of their products and their processes and still make advancements in their green claims? And if so, what do their green claims actually look like? So I'd like to present a short example, keeping in mind our favorite chocolate wrapper for now, of what a green claim and a potential greenwashing risk might look like. So let's have in mind layers of where green claims are made. We're thinking about products, we're thinking about processes, how the product comes into being, but also we're thinking about the producer, the company itself. And here we have green claims that can be turned potentially into greenwashing and some other additional risks that we'll discover in a moment. So one first example of a claim made related to the product is 100% sustainably sourced cocoa. Now, this is a risk of falsehood because of the complex web of interconnected actors within the cocoa supply chain, which makes it very difficult to completely eradicate, report, and monitor sustainability across all producers. Remember that around 5 million farmers work on producing cocoa, and everyone has to be individually assessed. Environmental factors also need to be accounted for, like climate change, deforestation, pesticide and pollution, as well as social and economic struggles, such as child labor and slavery, which are perennial across the confectionery sector. All in all, this creates an environment where achieving and verifying 100% sustainability for every single cocoa bean is an unobtainable goal. Second example relies on the process, the level of how the product comes into being. And here we can see examples such as recyclable packaging or packaging that contains paper. In Australia, across a few states, we had a trial or a pilot for the exact same product that had paper wrapping. Unfortunately, that piloting didn't go well, and they since then changed to recyclable materials. Now, what is the problem with recyclability? Well, it is a form of emission. In food sector, first in plastic packaging, only parts of the packaging can be recycled because of the sophistication of the material's origin. And remember again, when it comes to confectionery, chemistry and industry, chemistry and physics have an important role to play. At the same time, depending on the country and the regulations we have in the specific country, there is a specific demand for virgin plastic required for food safety, and this is because of potential hazards related to food contamination, chemical, physical, or biological. So we have a product, we have the process, and what would be a green claim made at the producer level? Well, it's something like this. On the front of pack, we see that the company, independently of its product and how the product comes into being, wants to plant more trees. On the back of pack, unfortunately, I don't have the photo available for that, but it says that it's specifically planting 1 million trees in Côte d'Ivoire. The problem with this is that it's both deceptive and vague. It really distracts one from the extractive nature of the cocoa production system, and it also doesn't really provide specific evidence of what is the purpose of planting these trees, where are they planted, and are they used to reduce emissions or just to offset them. And this is what we call claims-based greenwashing, everything that has to do with the textual meaning of a claim. We also have cases, though, of executional greenwashing, which relates to imagery, symbolism, and everything that can evoke nature. We see it in green leaves, in earthy tones, in specific logos. And make no mistake, the selectivity, deception, or omission tactics are deployed to create visual cues that imply sustainability without enough evidence. So these are some examples of what green claims look like. And I wanted to delve deeper into that and see, are they backed by the companies? And one approach to see that was to examine the company's own reports. Now we have here a pretty unesthetically pleasing table, and I do apologize for that. But where I would like to draw your attention are just a few key areas. Namely, the companies that are the largest confectionery producers, both in Europe and worldwide, and then means to assess their green claims. We're thinking first about governance. This is a measurement of how sustainability is integrated in the company's core governance framework. Do they identify the impacts of their materials? Are they setting targets? Are they making themselves internally responsible? The second layer involves sustainability within the food systems. So everything related to food production, climate change, deforestation, and so forth. This area evaluates and makes sure that companies disclose, set targets for, and truly reduce their environmental footprint. Third is the healthy food systems. This is a key connection between health and the environment because it describes the actions needed to achieve healthy and sustainable diets, such as improving the nutritional profile or making marketing responsible. Last but not least, we have inclusive food systems, which connects equity to the environment. This evaluates how companies respect and protect human rights within their operations and supply chains. It covers issues like child labor, forced labor, land rights, indigenous rights, but also the right for a decent payment. I'd like to take a moment now and ask you just to see how much red there is in this table. This is the performance of the companies. This is how well on track they are when it comes to their green claims. So if we're thinking in terms of products, soil, water use, and portfolios, they're lagging behind. When we're thinking about processes such as packaging and waste and issues like animal welfare, which are incredibly important considering the dairy industry is core to the chocolate production, they're all lagging behind. Lastly, if we're thinking at the producer level, are they investing in responsible marketing and labeling and a living income and making sure they're paying their farmers well? We see they're lagging behind. All of these areas are unfortunately in red. Unsurprisingly, though, two areas are performing decently, although not excellent. The areas related to the materials and to greenhouse gas emissions. But make no mistake, what you see in yellow is not an outcome of corporate initiative, but a result of regulatory push. And this is how I'd like to conclude today's presentation, speaking a bit about the regulation, specifically the EU regulation, but also its wider implications for our foods and our environment. So when we're thinking about the European Union, we see a map of a myriad of labels, green claims, environmental schemes, more than 230 to be precise. And what the European Commission noted was that more than half were false, vague, misleading, or unfounded. So instead, it wanted to propose a legislation that would actively pursue that kind of problem. And this legislation was built on 5 core pillars. The first one, substantiation, meant that in order to make a green claim, the claim has to have recognized scientific evidence. It has to have a life cycle assessment that proves environmental improvement. Small caveat here, LCAs don't really work in the food sector. They're very restricted to wine and cheese because apparently that's what most European countries are focused on, but they're nowhere near to capture ultra-processed foods or confectionery. The second pillar is communication rules, which means that before you communicate a green claim, you have to make sure that you've conducted the studies, calculations, and even have a certificate of conformity. The third and most important pillar, in my humble opinion, is the ex ante verification system. This implies that a third party has to come into play, an accredited third party, and has to confirm that the claim is accurate before it's made public. And this is incredible in the discourse around greenwashing because it can actually prevent a greenwashing risk from happening. And it's beneficial for both corporations as well as consumers. The third pillar is followed by the fourth, which is all about regulation of labels. There's so many labels already on the EU market. There's no need for more. Let's just make sure that we make good use of the ones that do exist. Fifth, this is the fourth, sorry. The fourth and equally important is the enforcement and penalty side. This is about making sure there are designated competent authorities that can investigate green claims, they can have corrective actions in place and dissuasive penalties. For the time being, within the proposal, the expectation of a penalty would be of at least 4% of the company's annual turnover. So that's a pretty hefty price to pay for making a green claim. And last but not least, we have exemptions because there's so much diversity when it comes to corporations in the European Union. So the smaller players need to have more time to understand what's the purpose of a green claim before they're engaging in making some. So this legislative proposal had a name, the Green Claims Directive or Greenwashing Directive. And as amazing as it was, it is currently halted. What we do have instead is a broad range of different types of regulation that could cover green claims to some extent. We're thinking here about sustainability, food systems, consumer protection laws, marketing practices, and rules around commerce. In total, there are 92 relevant pieces of regulation. Out of these, only 26 are relevant for the context of greenwashing. And most of them are found either in consumer-based regulation, environment protection, or in standards and rules for agriculture. However, we also see a diverse interplay of other sectors such as competition, monetary and finance, and justice. So why does this all matter when it comes to regulating green claims? Well, because the rules that we do have in place, that is related to consumers, environment, and agriculture, which can also be divided into two categories. It's either about consumer right for information and consumer protection against false misleading information, as well as commercial practices that protect both companies, but also competitors. So when it's about the existing types of regulation, we note some important features and defects. The most important of them all is that the regulation in place is reactive, responsive, and one-off. A harm really must occur for the regulation to be useful. There's no ex ante, no prior verification system. There's no blueprint and no integration of intent. Can greenwashing happen intentionally? Does it also happen inadvertently? Equally important is that the regulations that do exist do not really discourage greenwashing as a practice. They only provide some remedies if the harm is substantial enough. And this is something very difficult to assess, and it's done on one-by-one case. It also doesn't really guide compliance. It doesn't help companies that are well-intended but do not know how to navigate the green claims space. There's no standard for what a good green claim looks like. An exception to that rule, and an interesting exception, I would say, also tying it back to the regulation that ASIC has here in Australia, is that the finance sector is quite robust in integrating and appreciating the weight of greenwashing. Finance is the only sector that actually defines greenwashing as a concept, and it also provides a roadmap towards preventing it. And here we're talking about rules around financial services, as well as green bond standards and disclosure regulations. So finance in general tells us that a green claim has to be accurate, fair, concise, simple, but it doesn't leave things there. It also provides disclosure templates and involves the implication of an external reviewer that is accountable for what is reviewing. So this is an important lesson that comes from finance, because it tells us prevention of greenwashing requires both a robust definition, but also a positive standard or a guideline. Unfortunately, nothing like this exists outside finance, nothing in the food sector, nothing in the ultra-processed food sector. So what we're left with in visually understanding the regulation around green claims is that finance, as amazing as it is far from the point, and consumer or commercial practice rules are somewhere in between, but they have to be tweaked and interpreted either substantively or proportionately. And then we have the food sector or ultra-processed foods, where the highest greenwashing risks lay, but then the legislation, the regulation is not there to meet it. And somewhere in the clouds, we would have had the Green Claims Directive. What a shame that is it's still halted. But not to despair. The fact that the rules do not capture greenwashing doesn't mean they cannot in the future. And when we're looking at various types of rules that account for food sustainability, environmental sustainability, disclosure of information, access to correct information, marketing and practices, we see that there are many pieces of regulation that, even though on their own are not fit to integrate greenwashing, they can be connected to wider efforts. These efforts are strategies or frameworks that the EU abides by. They go from the European Green Claim all the way to the Paris Agreement commitments or the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And what we see here is that either in the core text or in the policy objectives these regulations have, there are different connections to the wider strategies and a potential to integrate greenwashing here. Notably interesting is that there are two pieces of regulation that are most connected to the strategy, and one piece of regulation that is completely isolated, these ones here. Curiously enough, these are also the only pieces of regulation that, even though they've been accepted, they do not enter into force because they've been delayed recently after an incredible resistance from the industry sector, particularly transnational food corporations. And here I'm mentioning the deforestation regulation that has the most relevance to the confectionery sector of how commodities like cacao, palm oil, sugar, and soy are being grown. And besides all of that, on the map, we also have the regulation around food per se, ranging from eco labels to marketing standards to quality of food to chocolate directives. None of them are explicitly connected to these wider strategic frameworks. And this reinforces the point that the instruments most proximate to regulating greenwashing in food are the ones least anchored to the broader EU sustainability goals. This also strengthens the argument about greenwashing being not an accidental outcome, but rather the result of a structural gap. And with that in mind, we conclude our brief chat about greenwashing. And in summary, the two main questions that I wanted to address today is greenwashing happening in the confectionery sector, and is regulation fit for purpose to address it? The answer is yes to the first, no to the second, but that is not where the conversation should end. We're living in very fast-paced, dynamic times. We see conflicts emerging at incredible speeds, like the ones in the Middle East. They're surging food prices. They're destabilizing our supply chains overnight. We see crises emerging. But these crises also have a way of forcing imperatives around regulatory imagination. The architecture exists. It just demands enough commitment and creativity on the side of policymakers, political leaders, and the stakeholders involved in the food systems. And as Obama's former chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, once said, "You never want a serious crisis to go to waste." So let's not make this crisis go to waste either. Thank you so much for your time.